Hello everyone, it's Joy. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having an amazing day. Make sure you subscribe so that way you never miss an upload. So, the case that I have for you today is going to leave you with a lot more questions than answers. How does someone allegedly annihilate their entire family and disappear without a trace for over 25 years? The case that we are going to be talking about today is the murder of the Fisher family and the wanted fugitive Robert Fisher. When we think about family annihilators, the first person that comes to mind, especially in recent years, is Chris Watts, a husband, a father, someone that those closest to him trusted to protect their family. However, before Chris Watts gripped the headlines and shocked the nation by what he did, there was someone else who did the exact same thing. However, to this day, his whereabouts are unknown. Let's dial back the clock to April 10th, 2001. It is 8:42 in the morning in Scottsdale, Arizona, which is about a 20 to 30 minute drive from Phoenix. Now, most people are getting ready for work, they're getting ready for school, they're going about their daily routine when all of a sudden, everyone in this particular Scottsdale neighborhood gets shook by a massive explosion. The explosion came from a house located on North 74th Place, and this sent smoke and flames all throughout the sky. Now, neighbors immediately dial 911. The first responders get there within minutes, and neighbors who are still in the area inform them that there is a family in there. And they are talking about Mary Fisher, her husband Robert Fisher, and their two kids, Brittany and Bobby. Later that morning, firefighters were able to put out the flames and they were able to make their way inside of the house. However, when they got inside, they discovered something that really changed the trajectory of this investigation. Inside of the home were three bodies: Mary Fisher and the two kids, Brittany and Bobby. Now, what was even more disturbing about this is the fact that Brittany, Bobby, and Mary were all in their beds. Now, if this was a fire that was caused by an accidental gas leak, let's say, you would think that Mary and the kids would be actively trying to get out of the house, right? You think you'd see them in the hallway or by the door even. But no, they were all in their respective beds, and when first responders got a closer look at the bodies, they realized that something sinister happened inside of this home. Mary was suffering from a gunshot wound to the back of her head, and her throat was slit, and Brittany and Bobby both had their throats cut. And this indicated to them that all three of the Fishers died before the fire even started. However, there's a big problem. There's an obvious problem. Where the hell is Robert Fisher? He's nowhere to be found. His family has been found brutally murdered inside of their home, and no one seems to know where this man is at. So, very quickly, Scottsdale police gets involved in the case, and they have to retrace the last 12 to 24 hours. And very quickly, they were able to figure out where Robert Fisher may have been leading up to the explosion. So just the night before, they see that there is ATM footage that shows Robert Fisher making a withdrawal at the local ATM. Now, in the background, you can see the family's Toyota 4Runner, which was not at the scene when the explosion occurred and first responders arrived. They see that Robert makes a withdrawal for $280, and this was about 8 to 10 hours before first responders arrived to respond to the explosion. So investigators realized very quickly that this man has about an 8 to 10 hour head start on them, and time is really of the essence to find him. About 10 days later, on April 20th, investigators got their first major break. In a wooded area, they discover the Toyota 4Runner that Robert Fisher was seen on surveillance camera with. Now, the 4Runner had been abandoned near Young, Arizona, and this was on the edge of the Tonto National Forest. Inside of the vehicle were some of Robert's personal belongings. However, there was no sign of him. And just a few feet away from the car was the family's dog, Blue. And Blue was alive and he was unharmed. Now, this discovery raised more questions. At first, investigators were thinking, did Robert take his own life? However, when they did a canvass of the area, there were no traces of this man. They thought he would be in a nearby cave and he took his life there, but there was nothing. Why did he withdraw $280? Was he trying to start a new life, build a new identity? Nobody truly knew what his motives were for all of this. However, in order to understand his mindset a little bit, we have to go back to his past. Robert William Fisher was born on April 13th, 1961. There was one event from his childhood that had a lasting impact on him. When Robert was a teenager, his parents divorced. Friends and family would later tell investigators that this really changed the way that Robert viewed family, viewed marriage, and failure. As an adult, Fisher built what appeared to be a stable life. He served in the United States Navy and later worked several jobs, including as a firefighter and a respiratory therapist. He married Mary in 1987, and the two would go on to have Brittany and Bobby. From the outside looking in, the Fishers had everything. They had a beautiful home. They had the beautiful kids who were heavily involved in extracurricular activities. They had a church community. Things were really looking up for them. However, behind closed doors told a different story. The marriage was struggling, and friends and neighbors and family described ongoing tensions between Robert and Mary. Like, it was bad, you guys. Arguments between the two became more and more frequent, and it was so bad where neighbors could hear screaming and hollering from their home. Even though they had all of the arguments and a lot of the marital troubles, they did try to make it work. And I think a lot of that had to do with Robert not wanting to see the marriage fail. They went to counseling, and Robert admitted that he had an affair with a prostitute, and he ended up getting an STD from that said affair. Yes, they were trying to go to counseling to resolve these issues, but I truly believe that Mary was probably at her wit's end and she was ready to file for divorce. However, we all know that at this point, Robert was staunchly against divorce and he was not going to let that happen by any means necessary. The image of maintaining a successful family was very important to him, and he was going to do any and everything that it took to maintain that picture perfect image. This brings us to April 9th, 2001. A neighbor reported that they heard the Fishers arguing inside of their home. That would be the last known signs of life coming from the Fisher family home. Now, after investigating the evidence, investigators came up with a theory. They believed that Robert Fisher feared losing control, and divorce would really cause him to lose control, and he just couldn't let that happen. Authorities believe that Mary was killed first, and Brittany and Bobby were murdered while they were sleeping in their beds. Investigators believed that Robert then disconnected a gas line inside of the home and set up a delayed explosion designed to destroy evidence and delay the discovery of the murders. Now, by the time the house exploded the following morning, investigators believe that Fisher had been gone for hours. The Fisher murders drew a lot of national attention. In June of 2002, the FBI added Fisher to the top 10 FBI's most wanted list, and this was a designation that was reserved for some of the most sought after fugitives in the United States. The feds believed that Fisher was armed and dangerous and was capable of surviving in remote environments, because keep in mind, he has that Navy training, and if needed to, he could survive out there in the wilderness for days even. Now, for nearly 2 decades, his face appeared on wanted posters across the country as investigators continued to search for answers. Now, as you can see on these posters, you can see age progressed photos of Fisher. So this is what investigators believe that he would look like in this current time. A very interesting thing happened a few years ago. Robert Fisher was actually removed from the top 10 most wanted list. Now, was this because investigators believe that he is dead? That's a really big question, because I feel like once you get added to that list, I feel like you shouldn't be removed. But that is just my opinion. But I'm curious to see what you guys think, why Robert Fisher was removed. Drop comments down below. However, even though they made the decision to remove Fisher from the top 10 most wanted list, investigators, especially in Scottsdale, they say that this case is still very active. Now, in other words, they're basically saying that even though he may not be on the FBI's most wanted list anymore, he is still wanted for the murders of Mary, Brittany, and Bobby. Now, over the years, authorities have received numerous tips and reported sightings from people who believe they have seen Robert Fisher. Some claim to have spotted him in various states throughout the US, and others believed he may have fled to Canada or Mexico. So now it's been more than 25 years later. Is Robert Fisher dead? Or is he alive? The first theory is that Fisher committed suicide shortly after abandoning the family's vehicle near the Tonto National Forest. Supporters of this theory point out that the Arizona wilderness is very vast and unforgiving, and if Fisher entered the forest intending to take his own life, it's possible that his remains have simply never been found. Now, the second theory is obviously that he escaped. However, the truth is, no one knows. There have been no arrests, there's been no body, there's just questions. For more than 2 decades, the loved ones of Mary, Brittany, and Bobby have been left with unanswered questions. Why? Why did this happen? Because Robert Fisher couldn't face a divorce? Because he didn't want to ruin the picture perfect image? This is a tragedy. This is an absolute tragedy. Mary was a great mom. Brittany and Bobby had so much life to live. And there is a family out there that is hoping that one day Robert Fisher will face accountability for what he did on April 10th, 2001. If you believe you have any information related to Robert Fisher or his whereabouts, please, please, please contact the FBI. All right, guys, that is going to be it for today's case. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you stay safe. Goodbye.